Mr. Johnson, do you think that U4 realistically can intervene in Chadian domestic affairs? That's one question. And generally an international peacekeeping mission, can it really be designated to keep the peace in a region and move to prevent the breakout of greater conflict and greater strife? Or are we asking too much?
Well, no, we're not asking too much. It's the basis by which they can operate. The problem is that their mandate is very limited. They've got a peace mandate at the moment. They've asked the Security Council for a much firmer mandate. But even if the firmer mandate were to be given, because the French have been told, if you think that you require a further mandate to operate even harshly against the rebels, you can get it. But the problem is that the French are not prepared to do that. They want to be seen to be impartial. They want not to take the strong stance that they recently took when they supported the president of the Chad in February, when he was clearly nearly overthrown by the rebels themselves. And the French, who dominate the European force out there, do not want to. They seem to have had a change of heart. And that may be reflective of the pressures that they're feeling at home, pressures internationally, and also they themselves are quite concerned that if they are seen to be taken aside by any one part of the rebels, they could find themselves sucked into this war, which may last for a very long time to come.
All right, Mr. Burns, does the French military continue to have a sway in countries like Chad, or has the time of old Franco-free system come to an end, as President Nicolas Sarkozy seems to be emphasizing and referring to these days?
Well, the problem is with President Sarkozy, he's back and forth on this. He makes these grand statements in the past about France sort of severing its hegemony in Francophone Africa, and then something comes up, and all of a sudden he turns, takes an about face, and goes the other direction. So it's quite up in the air right now, and history would say that France will not sit and let its one of its pet countries, like Chad, be overthrown by a rebel with all the turmoil which will result if Mr. Deby is overthrown. There's, again, he represents a small tribe with a great amount of power, and the turmoil, if he's overthrown, is far greater than France having to embarrassingly use its force, project power to maintain him.
I mean, Susan, if we just put some meat on the bones here, what you find is that even quite recently, the French have been accused by Mr. Deby that they have allowed the rebels to come into town, especially the fact that the French have been governing the eastern part of the country. And what you find is if the French gets involved in this, they will get swamped. They could find themselves in a very long, protracted war. And I think European countries in general are very fearful of that, especially the fact that Britain and America have indulged themselves in other conflicts and poked their nose in other people's affairs, and if they were to be seen to do so, it would not be necessarily a good thing. So learning from that experience, they're very, very, very cautious at this junction.
All right, but even if they weren't cautious, as you say, Mr. Johnson, do you think that does it really have the political clout that it used to have in the African continent? France, I mean.
Well, no. I mean, the French, like the British, were colonial masters themselves, and of course they've lost that power. But they've maintained the relationship because the French are there in that country at the invitation, as we would like to say, of the president of Chad. Mm-hmm. Now that relationship would sour and get even worse if they get involved in this war, that's what it is. It's a proxy war. It's a war whereby each country, be it the Sudan and the Chad, are using rebels from both sides to fight the war on their behalf. The mandate by which they have under the United Nations umbrella or the European umbrella is very, very, very strict, and it clearly states is to maintain peace, security for the thousands, hundreds of thousands of displaced people from both communities, be it from the Chad or from the Sudan as a result of the Darfur conflict, and more so of those who are actually fleeing the violence as it's happening in the Sudan and in the Chad as we speak.
Mr. Burns, do you have any comments to make?
There's no question about it. That's a very pithy description of the mission, and that's well said, and it's comprehensive.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
On the other hand, if Debye asks France's involvement, should he be under great pressure to be overthrown, I think the equation changes quite a bit. Perhaps not, but I believe it will, and the alternative is really calamitous for the interests of several Western powers in the region who have interests in the region.
I mean, Susan, if I can just sort of give a flavor of this. What you have within the European contingent, you have other countries. You've got Ireland, you've got the Spaniards, and a few others. And even if the French had the best will in the world to go in and assist, as similarly to what they did in February of this year, they're not going to get the support of their colleagues who are standing side by side under this umbrella. So that is the first problem. The second problem you have is that recently, many months ago, the French were very happy to fly all the way to Libya and actually procure arms and ammunition on behalf of the president of Chad, Mr. Deby. Now, this will not happen this time around because last time their mandate was different and of course the mood was different. Now the French clearly see that the rebels are ready for an all-out a war, and be it supported from Sudan as it's been claimed, and they're very mindful of this. They can see the writings on the wall for a major war here, because both sides have stopped diplomatic, they're not talking to one another, they've broken bilateral talks, the trading agreements have been scrapped, and there's no peace deal that can happen now that will salvage this situation that we find ourselves.
All right, Mr. Johnson, let me go back to comments that you made earlier regarding France. Mr. Kushner, the French foreign minister, stated that France will no longer intervene in Chadian affairs. Do you think that perhaps relations are changing right now between France and Chad? And is France sending a signal to Mr. Deby that it no longer wishes to play the role of former colonial master turned babysitter, if you may?
Yes, it's not a matter of it changing. It's changed. It's gone. I mean, they've clearly shown there's a difference in the mood, the actions, from the way the French operated back in February to what we're seeing now today. And that's because of the complexity and the change in mood on the ground. The fact that the rebels have intensified their efforts, clearly with support from Sudan, because clearly military aircrafts were used and ground personnel and armor carriage cars were used. Of course, the rebels would not necessarily have that to hand, nor can they afford that. So I think the French are very mindful. I don't blame them, because the way the situation is right now, the fact that Chad is surrounded by, is a landlocked country surrounded by Cameroon, surrounded by Niger, and of course by the Sudan and the central other countries. What you find is that the displacement of people is going to have a massive impact on the local communities, local countries. The Cameroon is suffering at the moment. These are poor countries at the best of times. How on earth can they have an influx of 300, 200,000 of people who are fleeing such carnage? So I think the French are in two minds. How can they maintain diplomatic ties? How can they be seen to be appearing neutral? How can they ensure that they don't upset the Chadian president? And how they can be seen internationally? Because the rest of the world is watching.